Experience.
Absolutely.
It's full when I sat down. You can take it, association.
Where are you located?
No response.
That's okay. I mean, it's not a big deal.
It'd be nice if he stayed with the program for the video.
Did you saw that?
Well, it doesn't. He can walk around because I have separate audio now, and I also have the presentation. So I like click back and forth.
Oh, I see. So when he's out of camera, you can.
I just got this thing. It's free.
That's neat that we're finally doing live streaming because I remember we couldn't before.
Yeah, it was hard because you couldn't get the presentation because it's so much lighter. So if you got it, then everything else is super dark and you can't see the speaker. So with this thing, it lets us do it. I mean, it lets us do it without, because they rely so much on the presentation that if you don't have it, it kind of like renders the lecture useless. So what I had been doing was like taping it and then putting it on later. But we've gotten like so many more views because of the live stream.
I can imagine.
Like last week we had 30 tuned in live, and then by the end of the day it had done up to 110 who watched the video from my library.
I know that. Good.
So if people can't come, then it tells me. See, we've got 2 right now. We have 2 here, 3 now, and as the thing goes on, it grows.
At the end of the semester, if you can, when it's all done,
Digital viewers.
send me, that data. That would be I think we might find the road.
We're live.
We're live.
Yep.
Not enough to stick. And it was, you had to be up like 2 beforehand out. Yeah, out to see it. So I didn't see it go.
Okay.
I like it because it connects to surface. I think they all they did put them on. Oh, I didn't know you had.
Good morning and howdy.
Howdy.
That sounded pretty lame. Howdy.
Howdy.
There you go. Well, welcome to the next installment in our Borlaug Distinguished Lecture Seminar Series. We have a real treat for you, for all of us here this afternoon. We have with us the Director General of the International Livestock Research Institute. And this is a special treat because of the great interest that we have here at Texas A&M, of course, in livestock. And I see some of my good colleagues from the Department of Animal Science here present. It is because of the leadership role that ILRI, as it's known around the world, has taken in addressing issues of significance to the livestock sector in developing countries. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about Dr. Jimmy Smith, who is the Director General of ILRI. He received his, or I should say earned, maybe that's the way we say it in academia, right? His doctorate degree in animal science from the University of Illinois. And from there, he went on to several roles. He worked at ILRI back in the day when ILRI was finding how to integrate itself better with the community. It was joining up with another international center. And so he worked there for a few years, but then he went on to the Canadian National Development Agency for a few years. From there, went to the World Bank, where he worked leading their livestock portfolio, global livestock portfolio. So very, very well renowned and experienced individual in livestock issues. And so then he was appointed finally as Director General of ILRI, April of 2011, I understand. And since then, he has just taken ILRI to new heights, I can tell you that. So it is with tremendous pleasure that I introduce to you Dr. Jimmy Smith, who's going to give us an overview of what they do, but then also I suspect he's going to probably tell us about some of the issues that we all need to tackle in livestock internationally to help carry forward really the legacy that smallholder farmers from poverty and hunger. So without any further ado, Dr. Smith, welcome to Texas A&M.
Thank you. Dr. Marinia, ladies and gentlemen. It is for me an honor and privilege to be here. My colleague Shirley Tarawali joins me in bringing greetings from all the staff at ILRI. Thank you very much for your warmth and hospitality with which we've been received. It's only my second time here at Texas A&M. Last time I was here was sometime in the mid-80s. I don't know why it's only the second time here at A&M, but I feel quite familiar here because many of the faces at this great university I've known for a long time. Hank Fitzhugh, sitting in the back there, recruited me into the CGIR into ILCA in the early 90s. Neville Clark was the chair of the board for a great part of that time. And Linda, who was also in the room, were fellow staff members at ILRI. So I feel very at home here and really very delighted to be here. I had a hard time deciding what I should say to such an illustrious, learned group as those here in this fine university. In the end, I decided that maybe not all of you are involved in livestock, so I'll say something about livestock. And maybe even if you were, not all of you are involved in international development. So I will say something about livestock in the context of international development. But since part of the motive for being here is to try to forge an even stronger collaboration with your university, I thought that I should also say a little bit of is in the context of the livestock sector and those that we are attempting to work. So I will attempt to give this discussion in three parts. What is the global livestock? Some challenges and what are we doing about them? Well, if you're a livestock person, you suffer a great deal of inferiority complex. Whenever there is discussion about global food security, it's always about what the contributions of crops. But it should be noteworthy, I should remind you, that 40% of agriculture GDP is contributed by the animal sector. So it's a very important sector. And in case you didn't realize this, that 4 of the top highest value global commodities are livestock. Dairy overtook rice just recently. And it's after cattle meat, pig meat, and chicken before wheat enters the picture. And recently, eggs has displayed maize amongst the top 10 important livestock commodities. So it's a very important sector, and particularly so because of the growth in the developing countries. Increasingly, this value that we speak about here is accruing in developing countries. Look at per capita global calories availability from edible animal source foods. You can see in red where it's most available. It's hardly in the developing world. Australia, US, some in Latin America, some in Asia, but mostly the developing world is low on animal source foods. But over the last decade or so, the demand for animal source foods has been going up very steeply. This is in response not only to population growth and urbanization, but most importantly, to increasing incomes. As incomes rise, people diversify their diets, and animal source foods become very much more important. So sometime in about the middle 90s, the developing world in red overtook the developing world in blue in terms of consumption of animal source foods. And even though per capita consumption in the developing world is much lower than in the developed world, this demand is going to grow over time, and by 2050, the diversions will become large, very large. If we were to project that consumption in the developing world were to become equivalent to what is the consumption in the developed world, the line would look as it is in the light blue. So animal source food, this is consumption. This is a demand-led phenomenon. It's not a supply push. This is what people are demanding. As you can see from these graphs, whether we look at demand for milk, or we look at milk in the per capita consumption, you can see that it's going to grow very rapidly in the developing world. The demand in terms of millions of tons in the developed world is not going to change that much, because in the developed world, we consume at a very high rate already. So demand is not going to grow very much, but it's going to grow very rapidly in the developing world. And per capita consumption, even though relatively low, is going to drive this huge demand. And rising most steeply is demand in Africa and Asia, particularly South Asia. Now, Africa used to be seen as the backward continent, but you may know by now that 7 of the fastest growing economies are in Africa at the present time. And as I said, demand for animal source foods is linked to increasing incomes. And so we see a huge demand for meat, milk, and eggs. In this slide, you can see no matter which livestock commodity, beef, pork, poultry, or milk, and no matter which region of the world you look at, you will see that demand is going to be growing very rapidly. So this is a phenomenon which is not easily reversible. As you know, those who are concerned about livestock and environmental issues and so on, the argument is if we want to save the planet, we should get rid of the livestock. And if we want to save our health, we should stop eating meat. Well, tell these people about that. This is going to happen whether we like it or not. And just to point out, although the other scales are similar, in the case of poultry, the scale is different. So please note that poultry in particular in South Asia is going to grow at a phenomenal rate. So this is about what between 2005 and 07 to 2050, we need from 2 billion to 3 billion tons of cereal per year. A third of this is going to be used for livestock production. And we're going to move from about 664 million tons to 1 billion tons of dairy each year. And from about 258 to 460 million tons of meat each year. So in aggregate terms, that's what we're looking at. This is, of course, a huge market in the developing world. So what are then, given this growth phenomenon, what are the challenges and opportunities? Well, I want to look at these in three contexts. Opportunities in the context of whom and where. As you know, the demographics of demand and supply, I just said, is changing very rapidly in the developing world. And there, mostly smallholders produce those livestock products. And if this market, as we say, will continue into the future, and the people who are supplying it now are smallholders, it represents a huge opportunity for them to combine meeting the global food security needs with helping smallholders to escape their poverty in rural areas. And so we also have the opportunity to make animal agriculture more environmentally sustainable. And I'll say more about that in a moment. But there's opportunities for who, and let me say that 90% of animal source foods are produced and consumed in the same country. Although trade for animal source foods is increasing, and increasing fairly rapidly, it is still true that 90% of animal source foods are produced and consumed in the same country. And most of this is produced by smallholders, and most of this is sold in informal markets. Over 500 million smallholders produce about 80% of that food in the developing world. And a very important development question in the developing world is the role of women. And 43% of the women workforce are engaged in this. So that's the opportunity for who? I did skip the why, but this slide I put up just to show you, because very often when we have this discussion, people say, no way, smallholders can't be producing all this livestock source foods. Well, here's an incomplete table for certain commodities and for certain parts of the world, and you can see the role of smallholders in the contribution to the supply of animal source foods at present. In East Africa, 60 to 90% of the milk is produced by smallholders, for example. In Bangladesh, smallholders produce almost all the commodities. They dominate. And so is the case in India, even in places like the Philippines. So smallholders are currently very much part of the demographics of who's producing these animal source foods. And in that context, as I said, an opportunity. So by connecting them to markets better, to transform their lives and their livelihoods. So how? Well, this rising demand will be met one way or another. It need not be met by smallholders. There are alternative ways, and we talked about that in a moment. But we, in the developing world, certainly ILRI, reason for being, is the fact that we believe that we can help meet that global food security needs, food and nutritional security, I should say, because not nourished. It's animal source foods that contribute significantly to nourishment. We believe that we can meet the demand for animal source foods in economically viable, sustainable, equitable, and healthy ways. And in contributing this aggregate demand for food or meeting the food and nutritional security, we can also reduce hunger and poverty in the developing world. But it wouldn't happen automatically. Much effort, much research, and that's why we're here and many of you are involved. So, as I said, this demand is happening. It's, except you go into prohibition, and we know what prohibition did to the demand for alcohol and everything else we prohibited. Except we go into prohibition, this is going to happen. So how is it going to be met? Well, there are various scenarios. We can meet this demand by importing the livestock foods in the developing world. And certainly that's an opportunity for Texas and many other places. Demand is growing and there's an opportunity to export. And that's one way it could be met. In many of the developing countries, however, they do not have the income to meet this demand for it. The food import bill for Africa at the present time is $48 billion. If Africa were to spend that at an increasing rate as population grows over time, more and more of that, where would it find the investments for infrastructure, health, education, and so on? So perhaps importation is one way, and a good part of the demand will be met by importation, but all can't be met by it. Another way is to import the technological know-how from those countries which have it in the developing world to the developing, from the developed world to the developing world. And this is certainly happening. In many places, large-scale industrial type livestock systems are developing. However, in many places, these will not be easily competitive because there's not enough feed, for example. There's also the issue, as we are finding out now in China. In my last job, a good bit of the Chinese borrowing from the bank was to clean up the pollution from large-scale industrial livestock systems. So this comes with its challenges, environmental and others. The third scenario is that we can help the smallholders meet this demand and transform their lives and livelihoods. In actual fact, all three of these will be at play in any developing country. But our argument is that by an investment in the research and extension and so on that is needed, one can help meet this demand in a very considerable way through the people who are already engaged in this endeavor. And therefore, we get 2 for 1. We meet the food and nutritional security needs, but we also use this opportunity to transform rural lives and livelihoods. So, this slide speaks to the point that I role of smallholders and what they would benefit from. Now, when we talk about smallholders, we're often said, oh, you guys are romantic. You just want to keep the smallholders where they are because it's a romantic thing. It's not at all. Our back of the envelope calculation suggests that about 1/3 of the people, the smallholders now, should find alternative livelihoods. They're too far away from markets. It's too rural. Or the ecology is so bad, they will not be able to be competitive under those circumstances. And probably a good thing to do is to help those exit the strategy. 1/3 will succeed in the market. They're already there. They're doing very well. Thank you very much. Quite efficient and effective. And there's 1/3 that can join this group or can join this group. They can go either way. So our research is essentially focused on these two. Although much of what we do help to support the people who are probably not going to be commercial farmers, but will continue to be there on a subsistence level, and therefore public good, safety nets, and so on will be required. And some of what we do, for example, on on vaccine and so on development for that time. So responding to the livestock research and development challenges and opportunities, we've talked about this in terms of trajectories of growth. There are areas where there are strong growth, and the strong growth is opportunities for intensifying and increasingly market-oriented, often enabling smallholders to be transformative. This is the so-called area of best opportunities. But there are also areas of fragile growth where remoteness, marginal land resources, climate, and so on will make life very difficult. It's hard to become very efficient and effective there. And then there's the high growth with externalities, mostly the industrial system. So this is a conceptualization of how we think about the opportunities. And in this table, which I do not have enough time to pursue all the issues, we put those typologies, look at the sectors that are, or subsectors that are involved, some of the issues, and what are the opportunities. As you can see, this is clearly the commercial guys, strongly commercial guys. Here, there is a fair amount of public sector investments that are required to help the people who in those circumstances exist. And here, the problems are mostly environmental and mostly large-scale private sector is involved. Well, if we're going to achieve food security in equitable, environmentally, and healthy ways, there are a whole series of things which we must do. And I'm not going to go into all this. A lot of this is intuitive and self-explanatory. Connect smallholders to markets. If you don't connect smallholders to markets, they can't become economically viable. So that's very critical. But we must also deal with animal health issues. We must deal with genetics, we must deal with feed, we need to deal with sustainable systems, and so on. This is a huge agenda that we and our partners and you here at Texas are working on. I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but I'm going to segue now into some of the things that we are working on and only touch on some of them for expediency of time and for aid the discussion. Well, if you look around the world, you will see that the burden of zoonotic diseases fall on the poor. Map the incidence of zoonotic diseases in red, and the various sizes of red will tell you about the numbers of outbreaks, but you can see it maps very well to the developing world. So the developing smallholders bear the burden, the brunt of the burden of this. And it's not just zoonotic diseases, whether they are of pandemic or non-pandemic importance, but there are a whole number of endemic diseases that these smallholders deal with. The point is, health is a crucial factor. As we look at what's happening in the developing world, we know, and I put this up to essentially say that in the past, many of us in the developed world thought that many of these problems were far away. Well, what has happened with African swine fever has shown that many of that disease in particular, which was far away, can come very close. The people in Europe are very concerned that African swine fever will be part of the European equation. So health is very important and become more important over time as we connect each other, we move around the world faster and so on. And so we're attempting to work on this by creating a global vaccine initiative. And all this typology of this slide shows is that some of the areas of competence we are developing with the diseases for which we are attempting to develop vaccines. We're particularly keen on the work that is happening here in Texas, for example, on African swine fever, which is one of the diseases we are working on, and for which we know that you have strong expertise and already doing probably ahead of the curve on this disease. But there are many others that vaccines are still the cheapest way to control the disease. But of course, it's not the only way. And we have parallel programs that look at herd health and related aspects, so as to reduce the burden. Remember, health is not just the absence of disease, and so it's more than getting vaccines out. This is really to illustrate that we work in consortia. We're a relatively small organization. You're an organization of almost $4 billion. We are $100 million. So increasingly, we have to prioritize what we work on, and we work with strategic partners in consortia. So we put together the expertise that is needed to tackle a particular problem, drawing on expertise wherever we can find that expertise, and to work in long-term consortia. And that's an example of the one for East Coast fever. I mentioned African swine fever, which is a topic we'll be discussing. And I already alluded to the expertise here at Texas A&M that we would like to join with and do more. I don't know if you know, but I've already said that 90% of animal source foods are produced and consumed in the same country. Much of this, over 70% of that, are sold in informal markets. They're sold like this in many parts of the world. So food safety is a very important issue, and for which we have developed some expertise, and for which you have considerable expertise, another area that we would like to explore with you. We are working with you on the area of risk and how you're handling risk in food safety. You know, the current regime in food safety on the books is that you cannot trade if you have the pathogen, essentially a hazard situation. If you have the hazard, you can't get to our market. We're saying we should change that to a risk-based approach. You may have the hazard, but you can produce safe food. And that should be the basis on which we proceed in the future. In the past, when a developing country wanted to improve productivity, exotic genotypes were imported, often not suited for the environment and produced worse than the indigenous animals. Well, new tools in genetics and genomics are opening possibilities for us to make tremendous gains using genetics and genomics. And so we have a platform where we call LiveGen, where we're looking at how we target, how we do gene discovery, and how we deliver the genetics. Of course, with a series of cross-cutting approaches in partnerships, as I just said, and for capacity development. Simply put, if we look at this disease, one of the worst problems in Africa, here is a highly susceptible animal, the Boran, very popular breed in East Africa, with the